Hello, thank you for that, Janet. So we're recording the session from now. This is our best practice network for the education and early years technical qualification. And just a quick reminder that we can't discuss any live assessment questions, so they would go to our customer support team. But thank you for joining us on this network meeting. And if you're watching the recording, thank you for watching the recording. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Gemma to do the first introduction.
Hi everybody, my name's Gemma and I'm the Provider Development Officer for Education and Early Years at NCFE.
Hi, I'm Janet King, Sector Manager for Education and Early Years at NCFE.
And I'm Helen Scanlon, part of the provider development team. So we've all been involved to varying degrees and levels in the education and early years T-level for 4 years now. So we're going to share some top tips, but also help you guys share some top tips as well. But the first thing we're going to do for those who are here with us today is to ask you about your confidence levels. How confident do you feel in today's topic? So we're going to be talking about the early years educator, assignment 2, part 2, and the structured observations. So I'm going to launch a poll, which I'm afraid the recorded people won't see, but for the live attendees here, how confident do you feel about assessing the structured observations? So assignment 2, part 2 of early years educator. I'm just going to chat for a little while, give you some time to answer that question for us. Lovely, thank you. Okay, so the results we've got, as you can see on the screen now. So we've got some very low levels of confidence. So thanks for being honest and sharing that with us. Hopefully that'll improve over today's session. So thank you. And questions. If you have any questions, please pop them into the chat in the Teams function as they come up. I know I've had one already. Janet, can I bring you in to answer the first question?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's quite a few questions, but they are all really so far talking about those registrations for our occupational specialisms. So the main theme of the question is, when do we register for our occupational specialism? Even if this is made at your initial registration, you must confirm your occupational specialism at the beginning of year 2 or towards the end of year 1. You will be required to make those OS registrations confirmed, because students do change their mind, and that there is some transition that goes on. So you will be asked to do that, and it's at that point, because there's another question just come in about the moderation. It's at that point that will trigger the moderator to get in touch with you. So even though you may well have registered your students for an EYE or an AT right at the very beginning, or you may have chosen that as part of your ESP scenario, you will be asked to make those confirmations towards the end of year 1, beginning of year 2, as soon as you can, and then your moderator will be in touch. So that answers the questions that we've had so far. Thanks, Helen.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot. So we're going to ask Gemma to keep an eye on those questions as well this afternoon, and we'll answer them as we go. But we're now going to move on to the really useful parts. So we've had a moderator and one of their moderated provider staff have a meeting about sharing the top tips for the structured observations. So we're going to run that video for you now. Hello, thank you for joining us today. We've got Marie, we've got Laura and Gemma. I'm going to say welcome to this recording. We're going to be talking about the structured observations for education early years T-levels. So I'm going to hand over to Laura, who's an NCFE member of staff, to introduce herself and start us off.
Hi, so I'm Laura Robshaw. I'm the moderator on the T-level for EYE and AT, and I cover the Yorkshire, Humber and East Midlands providers. Thank you.
Gemma, please say hi.
Hi, I'm Gemma and I'm the newest member of the Provider Development team at NCFE, and I'm here to support education and early years T-level providers on their T-level journey.
Thanks, Gemma. And then last but by no means least, Marie. Hello.
Hi, so I'm Marie Cartree. I'm a T-level assessor for Garforth Academy, which is just outside of Leeds.
Lovely, thank you. Okay, Laura, we're going to hand back to yourself to start talking about the structured observations.
Yeah, so when we talk about structured observations, we are referring to assignment 2, part 2. So you might hear it referred to that, or you might hear it referred to structured obs. It does consist of 3 separate structured observations, and the tutor guide is online. It's on the Qual Hub. You can have a look on there at what they consist of. We expect the observation to be about 30 minutes and the professional discussion to also be around 30 minutes. That's just guided time, so if they do go over it is fine, but we just ask that they practice beforehand and they try to keep to that 1 hour mark per observation where possible. The observation is carried out once and it is observed by the provider appointed assessor, like what Marie would be doing. The skills are real, occupational valid, so they can only be observed in the industry placement. They can't be done in a classroom. They have to be done out in the placement. You've got to plan that in line with the placement that they can do all 3 there. We do ask that you give them those expectations beforehand so they know what's happening. This is especially important for the professional discussions. If you've got a setting that's saying they can't do a professional discussion there, you do need to question whether you can use that setting because it is part of their exam. They have to do an activity and a professional discussion straight after. So we do advise you do that when looking at your placements. The observations are an one-off end assessment, so they shouldn't be carried out until the provider thinks the student's ready. So the moderation window of part 2 opens the 1st of February and runs through till mid-May, the deadline this year being the 17th of May. And that'll alter per year, so you just have to check your deadlines. So we ask that they're ready. So it might be that your students are ready and want to do it beginning of February. Some might want to do it a little bit later. It's important, again, that you're planning for that in line with individual needs to make sure that if they are moderated, that plan can be delivered by the moderator as well, because obviously the moderator's got to fit in all their providers from the 1st of February to the end of May. So if you've got students that you think are ready and you want February, get in there first so you can get those preferred dates. If you've got students that you think will benefit from more time and you don't want that to happen until the end of April, again, share that with your moderator so you can try and make sure that they can be accommodated. We want them to do the very best, so we want to make sure they're ready, and I know you will too. The observations are marked. Assessors must carry out the observation and award a mark against each criteria. So you will see in the tutor guide, there's the criteria for each of them, the marking bands are there, and each one of the criteria is marked. They're slightly different in length, so there's 1, 2 and 3, the third one being a lot longer, more criteria, so you do need to mark each individual one. The total marks achieved across all 3 observations are counted towards the final grade. So it's really important. For moderation purposes, as a moderator, we have to moderate 2 out of the 3 observations, so we don't have to see all 3, we just do 2 out of the 3. They could be planned back to back, so some students do observation 1 and 2 or 2 and 3. Moderators have to see a range of all of them across the cohort, and they do have to see all assessors. So if you've got more than one assessor, we do have to see them. So that's important to consider in the planning. But we do only have to do 2 out of the 3. You can do the third one at your own time. Some of them do them separate. So in Marie's case, they had 2 Mondays. So we went the first Monday we did the 3 students in a day, and the following Monday we went back and did the second observation, and that worked really well. We do say for moderation purposes, trying to fit 3 or 4 into one day is preferred. Yeah. In terms of feedback, so you can give verbal feedback to your students in terms of how they performed. However, assessor marks should only be shared with your students after all 3 have been completed. That then gives them time to appeal any marks that you may have given as per your college procedures. And then we do say that is subject to moderation changes as they're submitted. For moderation purposes, we can't give any feedback or share marks with assessors. We both put our marks in blind. So that's just to say assessors go out, they mark, we go out for moderation purposes. We're also watching the student, we're also marking, we put our marks on, assessors put their marks on, they're on blind, and then we find out following moderation if we're in tolerance or not. And there's 3 different things that can happen after that. So if we put our marks on, the 3 outcomes are all provider marks are in tolerance, in which case there's no further action. If we're out of tolerance, but they're in a consistent way, i.e. consistently too lenient or consistently too strict, a calculation's applied, and that adjustment would be applied to all students in the cohort. And if they're out of tolerance, then further moderation takes place that is done remotely. Okay, so that's the 3 different options. In terms of documentation, Marie might talk a little bit more about this, but we ask for initial planning forms for students and activity plans beforehand, so moderators can have a look at that. Then we ask assessors to complete an observation of skills forms and a professional discussion form, which is usually, we recommend that's audio justification of your marks, so why have you given those marks, and that's all uploaded onto the system. There might be additional evidence for some of the observations, like SO1, we ask for an observation of a child that links to maths because that's part of the criteria, and for SO3 they have to complete a risk assessment. But all this documentation is provided to assessors beforehand, and there's a checklist for them to complete. In terms of top tips from providers, so Marie will share some of her top tips, I'm sure, but I did ask another college to share that I support, and that's Bishop Burton College, and they said that it is important, as I mentioned, for students to get the opportunity to practice these observations. So I know for some, part 1, they use that when they're observing for EYE part 1, they'll go out and follow the same pattern, do an activity, do a professional discussion, and make sure the students are feeling confident in that. Professional discussions, obviously it is really nerve-wracking for the students to do the professional discussion, especially when you've got 2 people watching. So the more practice you can do, the more confidence you can give them, the better. So Bishop Burton started doing a speed dating type lesson to support them with the professional so they'd cover one criteria, for example, 1.1, they'd listen to each other, they'd peer review them, then they'd move on to another student for say 1.4 and follow that same process. So it enables them not only to practice, but also to receive feedback, and listen to other responses that may prompt or remind them of something that they may have done and add that to their own discussion. And it also supports them with the timing and the confidence. Okay, so now I don't know if you've got any questions or if you want to hand over to Marie just to share where you're from, Marie, and a little bit about your process.
Yeah, sure. So as I say, I'm Marie Cartry, I'm from Garforth Academy. We've been very, very lucky this year with our cohort because it's been very small. So within year 13, we currently have 3 students. And that's been amazing for me because it's given me that time and that opportunity to really understand this whole process. Next year we have 9 students, the year 12s currently, so that can carry across. And I feel like that's been a great starting point for me. In terms of the way we've worked, we've been very fortunate, we believe, because Laura's been absolutely amazing. I don't think we realised just how much support we would get. I think we thought it was just going to be kind of like an online support, as it were, but it's not. Laura's been amazing. She's always at the end of an email and responds to any questions that we have, which has been fantastic. In terms, if you're happy, guys, I'll just launch into sort of the process and how we have operated. So in terms of, you know, the moderation process for part 1, we were successful, and luckily enough, we were able to kind of get that under our belts early on. So that was completed before Christmas, and that allowed for the students then to really kind of put that to bed and focus now on part 2 in the new year. So it was nice that they had that Christmas holiday to just get that in their minds and feel confident that they were ready now to be assessed in their skills. We felt our students were ready and we got booked in nice and early. In our minds then, it just gave us that opportunity to purely focus on part 2 and then concentrate on the other elements of the course after that had been completed. So we booked in nice and early, as I said, and that allowed Laura to have a look at our timings and really work out how that was going to work best for the both of us in terms of the visits themselves. So the students kind of were in control of that process as well. They were kind of saying, well, it would suit me best on a Monday at this time. And giving them that power and control helped them to feel more confident with the process and the booking and the timings and so on. We had ensured that we did a little mock beforehand. So another one of my colleagues came along and we had a practice of one of the structured observations, and that really did help them because we also graded them and we talked through the grading system with them clearly, so they knew their next steps for learning and what they needed to do next time. And it just gave them confidence as well in thinking, actually, this isn't that different to what we've done in part one, because all of the process is really just the same. It's just the same as part one. It's just that now they're ready to really sell themselves and their skills. It was really important for us that the students and the whole team delivering T-levels were aware of the marking criteria and what it actually really did mean, and the difference between each of the bands. Because in terms of the wording, it's only very slight. So we had big discussions around, well, what does that mean? And some of the students, you know, as we were reading and sharing together, when we were looking at those things, it was kind of, oh, so the only difference, say, for example, in one of the strands is making sure we kind of talk about biological factors and environmental factors and how they impact that child's learning. So it was really kind of unpicking what each of those skills were and how they could showcase those skills through the observation and professional discussion. We also made it really clear where those marks could come from. So in terms of, for that particular strand, it could be, it's just direct observation. So everything had to be in there. Whereas sometimes that could be supported through the professional discussion and their knowledge of everything they've learned. Or, you know, indeed, it could be just purely professional discussion. So they were clear on that. It was really important that they had the time to plan in school and that they had lots and lots of opportunities, as Laura's already said, other colleges are doing this, to really thrash out their answers and to practice. We found that allowing the students to plan together within the building on a particular structured observation helped, because then they were bouncing ideas off one another, making suggestions. And because we've got some gorgeous resources within school, they were able to kind of put their hands on the things that they needed, then go back to placement. You know, if they did need anything in addition, they could support each other and get everything that they needed. It was really important that once they'd done their planning, they had time to redraft it. So we were fortunate in that, as I said, Laura has been amazing in that, oh, just remember, you know, to get that mark, you would need to make sure that the students have done X, Y, Z. And so that really helped. So that time to redraft what they've done and really add those additions was incredibly useful. And also just making sure that the settings are aware that it's an exam. And I know Laura's mentioned this in terms of your settings, but we've found that making sure that they are clear on exactly what is going to be assessed and what is required is absolute key. I mean, things happen, you know, these are workplaces, you know, we are all adaptable, but we've been very fortunate in that we've had full support there. So for instance, a room has been provided that's suitable, that allows that professional discussion to happen, but it's confidential as well, and that no one else is kind of eavesdropping or listening in. And so it's treated in the way that it needs to be, and that it's that professional examination. In terms of kind of the afterwards, so once it's happened, you know, our students, we were really, they felt very, very comfortable because right throughout part one, this process was the same. We had the room for the discussion. They were receiving the documentation that is suggested for part two. So nothing was different for them. It was just as normal. As I said, Laura was great in terms of, you know, they making the students feel comfortable, and that is really important. So we were lucky there. So it was nothing out of the ordinary, but kind of afterwards, it was right. What does that feel like? So for me, because I'd used all of the paperwork from before, it was just exactly the same. So say, for instance, making sure that the answers were time stamped just helped me, so that when I was going back and marking, I could think, well, actually, what did they say then? Where is it in that kind of recording? The process is long. It's a long process. You know, I'm new to this, so that's probably why it took me so long. But I feel next year it won't be as long, because I'm very clear now in terms of what's expected in the grading and so on. It does take quite a long time, but I think if I was going to offer advice in terms of the grading, what I had done was I'd completed the observation form and the discussion form, made my own notes, and then did the justification form later. No. Next time, there's no point doing notes. It's directly onto that justification form. Using that form, it's very, very, very helpful to highlight, kind of where your students sit, look for that best fit, and then whilst it's fresh in your mind, pop those points on there so it's very, very clear. And also, because that document is going to be shared with students, as Laura's already explained, in terms of so that it can support the process, the general process of examinations, to pop on there what would be required for further marks, so that in my mind I will remember and my other colleagues can understand, oh yeah, they would need to do XYZ to get that higher mark actually. And that moderation and that discussion with colleagues, making sure that that happens, that everybody is on the same page, and it's kind of, and that also helps professional development across the board for this T level as well, because we all know where we're aiming for in terms of for year 12s. That's really helped us. So, once that point is done, and I'm now at that point, ready to share that kind of information with the students quite recently. It will then just be obviously checking everything through and making sure everybody's happy before it's submitted onto the portal. I think just one final thing time-wise, as an assessor, from an assessor's point of view, is to consider where you're at with the year 12s, because kind of at the start, as I say, we were very fortunate. For our current year 13s, that kind of moderation process for part 1 had been completed within that first term. It was done. That meant for me as an assessor for the year 12s, as they were on placement, I could pop in and see them, but in terms of having a look and assessing their skills, it was a back burner for us. So my other colleagues visited, make sure they were confident and so on within placement. My focus was purely being 13s up until Easter. So it's now switched, that's complete. And I'll be working now with my year 12s, which we've already actually started, and going into placement and starting that part 1 process. So just kind of in your mind, getting that clear. So again, I would reiterate, just making sure that you're clearly focused and you know exactly where your priorities are, who you're working with, and what you want to achieve.
I'm going to dive in and ask a quick question, Marie, if that's all right.
Okay.
Laura said that the moderation is 2 out of the 3 observations. How did you choose which 2 to do?
Yeah, so as I said, in terms of, it was very much worked alongside the students. What date would you like? What time would you like? I then put that information onto the portal. Laura looked at that, checked against her diary what would work. A little bit of rejigging, but not particularly very much, just to suit. Then everybody kind of went back, checked with the settings, checked the timings. So as long as you're in there early, that's not an issue. You can get that planned, but obviously for me, that's just been for 3 students. If you're talking about a larger cohort, then you would need a block of time to be able to do that and set aside time for that. But, as I said, communication is strong and it's quite quick. So as long as that's your focus, that can soon be sorted.
I always tell providers that the moderation process is done with you rather than to you. Would
Yeah.
you agree that that's okay for me to say?
Absolutely. I mean, I think, at the end of the day, for us, Laura was just kind of in the background, to be quite honest, of the whole process. And nurseries and schools are busy places. I think the students are quite used to lots of people observing them all the time anyway, which is natural,
Yes.
and that's right. And I think as long as I said, if you follow the same sort of process in part 1, it's nothing different. And that additional person, because that we ensured that, say for instance, Laura had arrived early, we both went down together, we went to see the students, we had that little informal chat, things that Laura would say in terms of, oh, I like that, or I like that would be fed back to students, and that kind of like helped their confidence to grow, and they thought, oh well, actually, yeah, I've got someone who's looking for what I can do, not for what I can't do.
And are you getting your year 13s to talk to your year 12s to prepare them as well?
That's been a constant thing. So kind of like, once they had done the moderation process, they were talking about how good that was and how they felt afterwards. And that's been actually quite key. And once you've gone through the process once, you're kind of so much more aware as well. So say,
Comfortable.
for instance, with the year 12s, you know, we're quite close knit with the 13s. You know, they'll share their experiences just naturally within school. But also, you know, for us, we've kind of, you know, we've started the process, as I said, of collecting that evidence, and we're saying to them, do you remember when the year 13 said for SO3 their routines, they did this, this, this? So, you know, when I've gone in and done that, they've said, oh, I tried to do what the year 13s did, you know, so that's really key. Yes.
Just before I bring Gemma back in, I'm going to ask one more question. You talked about you'd been doing some standardisation type activities.
Yeah.
Is that within your teaching and assessing team?
It is, yeah. We're only a small team, excuse me, but because one of my colleagues had already done the mock, they were kind of like, oh, I understand that SO actually quite well. And the lead has done, she's been within this kind of system for such a long time. She's had a lot of experience, you know, so in terms of, it's just about getting to know the criteria so very, very well. So say, for instance, when we were doing part 1 and I usually do a lesson and say, right, I'd like to see this. This is the criteria you'll focus on. This is what the year 13s had shown me. Does anybody want to pitch in? You know, my colleague would be there for that. Then she would plan alongside the students, support them. So it's very much that kind of, oh, that's why we did that, because that feeds into SO2 and so on. So I would just say, this has been very much a joint journey within the whole team. Actually, we've learned alongside one another and vice versa. So I've kind of been in, although it's not particularly my role, because my role literally is just, you know, the assignment 2. It's kind of, I've been involved with other things. So say, for instance, when they've done their ESP discussions and all of that, it's kind of, because then, you know, you can speak to the students, you've got that kind of overview on what the T level is actually requiring, and that's been good.
Go on then, Gemma, dive in, ask your question.
Yeah, I've got a quick question, and probably Marie and Laura have both got a take on this. So I often get asked by providers about the links with settings and how to make sure that settings know what's required of the students. Previous iterations of early years qualifications have been, you know, perhaps a little easier to follow in terms of what's required of the placement. So if you were to give top tips for what do placements need to do to support you, so what do settings need to do to make sure your students get the best outcomes from these structured observations, what do you think they would be?
Do you want to answer, Laura? Or?
Do you want to share what you did with yours beforehand, before using them? Yeah, and then I can jump in after if there's anything else.
I think the key thing is just communication. So in terms of kind of, you know, we just used, I know you can't see that very well, we just used the online stuff from the tutor guide, created a document, and then basically I just didn't throw it at them, but I just kind of said, oh, this is what structured observation 1 is, this is what it looks like, look at this, can you believe to get four points for this they need to do XYZ, even just to get 2 they're going to need XYZ, and just, you know, if they are interested in that, going down that avenue, but just, you know, ensuring that the students sort of share their planning with the room leaders, asking for advice. And again, that's where the time comes in. But I think the part 1 process supports part 2 perfectly, because you have been in so much and shared kind of like your experiences along the way, that, you know, you gauge it on kind of how much they want to know, and if they trust you in that process, then, you know, you can, as I say, show them certain documentation, but really it's about getting those students to talk to those room leaders and key workers so that they've got more of an idea of what's going on.
Yeah, I'd say exactly the same. The other thing I know that Bishop Burton shared, again, got using them as an example, but they shared that they have provided placement meetings, so they invite the mentors from the placements in the summer term to for the ones that they are going to be using, and show them the expectations, talk through the expectations, and so to make sure that they're clear about it is an exam condition. If it's okay, if I just talk a little bit about the AT, because obviously Marie's talked about the EYE and part 1 a lot. Well, for AT, they don't have the part 1. So any teachers that are looking at delivering the AT occupational specialist, it's just to say that although you don't have part 1, obviously we advocate to go out and visit the students in year 1 and year 2 to help them prepare for those structured observations, doing mock exams if possible. So I've worked really closely with Notre Dame College, and they have done mock exams for all their students, which has really benefited them because they've seen what is expected. They've done the observation, they've done the professional discussion. The assessors have been into the schools that they're in, so the teachers know what to expect. And there is a lot of criteria for AT that's about working in partnership with the teachers. So if they have time to be able to discuss at the end of the observation, factoring that time in, because we know that they're often in the middle of teaching, so it's not always possible, but to achieve those higher marks, if they can give feedback to the teacher and that teacher's giving, it's only 5 minutes, but if they can allow that 5 minutes, it can really support them higher marks. But again, it all comes down to planning and communication. The students really need to take ownership of that. They really need to be sharing their planning. They really need to be saying, can I have 5 minutes of your time on this day? It will really help me with my exam. And we know it's not always possible. And if it's not possible, there's work around. They can write what they will tell them. They can show us what they will tell them, as long as they've got those next steps in, because they need next steps for higher marks. So it's making sure that, as Marie said, you know the criteria, you know the marking bands, you can communicate and be organised, and that will benefit all your students, whether you're doing the AT route or you're doing the EYE, or in some cases you're doing both. Yeah, so okay.
Thanks, Laura. I've got another quick question. Marie, was anything that's happened that you didn't expect to happen?
Oh, yes,
What
absolutely.
type of
Yeah,
thing?
it's just the normal things that happen within schools and nurseries, to be quite honest. So say, for instance, you know, one of the students, actually it was for the SL3 each time. So what happened was, on that particular day, they were having a kitchen refurb, and of course it was connected to the snack. So what happened was, actually, the student did really well, and so did the whole team. It was that communication, right? Well, what will that mean? Is snack, or you know, going to be delayed? So that communication, say yes it is, right? So therefore, what are you going to do to this particular student? Have that discussion, right? We'll need a holding activity, let's make sure it's linked to XYZ. And so again, we did that. And then on another occasion, a different student, again with the routine, the care routines, timings were slightly out, so that student had to actually kind of adapt their plan and add other things to be able to try and showcase their skills, which they did. And I think it's just about having that kind of like relaxed attitude. And also one more thing to add, I know Laura had spoken already about ideally 30 minutes for professional discussion. Sometimes those overrun, and of course timing is very tight because obviously you're traveling between settings, and I think, you know, it's just about that flexibility, and just kind of keeping it nice and cool. You know, at the end of the day, as I said, it's about finding out what the students can do and celebrating that, rather than thinking what they can't do, or pulling that apart. So yeah, just be adaptable as you would normally.
Life happens, and you can practice, you know, what
Yeah.
if this happens, what if that happens,
Yeah.
can't you? Yes. Yeah. Laura,
Mhm.
any top tips from the moderator side of things then?
I think the planning and organisation, it's been brilliant working with Marie, because she's adhered to all the timescales that we've had. So she organised the visits well in advance, like just after we met in September. So that was all good. You submitted your planning in advance, so I've been able to look at that, give feedback, acted on all feedback given, which has been really nice to see. Obviously met at the placements and followed everything through as expected. Again, listened to that feedback that's been given and applied that, which has all been really beneficial and made that process really smooth and benefited the students, hasn't it? Yeah. Did you have a
On
question?
Gemma, dive in.
I would just like to ask Marie then, so now that you've sort of in the throes of it, we're almost done with the structure jobs. If you could give one piece of advice to somebody who's about to start doing them for the first time, what would it be?
It will be fine because it's nothing that you haven't already been doing. As long as you have support, as long as you've got that key communication going and you can be organised, just allow yourself enough time to get your head around things. It's nothing out of the ordinary. Your students are already doing it, and all you're doing is highlighting and showcasing the skills they've got.
Love that. Anything else that you think, oh, I must say this or I must share that?
I think in terms of preparing the students, it's trying to make sure that they are as as professional as they can be, as quickly as they can be. So I know that sounds like a tall order, but for the 12s, it's much easier if you have a cohort from before, because you'll recognise that professionalism straight away and the difference between those two age groups. But it's just kind of getting them to understand that they are valued within the workplace, even though they've just started, and
Yeah.
that their
They have a
professionalism
key
is
role, don't they?
something, yeah, to be proud of and to build upon, and to help them to understand that they do piece together so beautifully within this course, and it prepares them for whatever they want to do within the future. So the quicker that they can kind of get on board with that. So that's why I think the professional discussions are key. Originally, when we first started the process with the 13s, we kind of kept things quite loose with the professional discussion. I wouldn't give them pre-prepared questions beforehand, but actually, as we went on, the 13s said we really would want them because it helps us prepare and then they can practice more so. And so quite quickly within the process of part one, we did that. And I just hope that it helps them to come across more professional. The more practice they've got, the better they get at it. So yeah, just kind of like get switched on as soon as you can. We don't have any time to waste.
Lovely, thank you. And anything else from Laura? Is anything else you'd like to share? Or
The only final thing is to say that at the end of the process, so on results day, when the results go out, the providers receive a report from moderators, and that highlights strengths, areas for development, and anywhere where our marks may have differed. So obviously they won't know that until results day which marks have been taken, but if we have marked more lenient or if we've marked harsher, then reasons for that will be in the report, showcasing which were really strong observations and where marks may have been lost and reasons for that. And as Marie said, that will all feed in then to professional development for assessors, tutors going forward, and to support those other students going through the process.
I've got one final question. I've just realised people do ask us about the standardisation training that we provide you. So you would have got a sort of a pack when you started year 2. Can you share anything insight about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a useful process to go through. It's quite difficult, isn't it? In an ideal world, it would be wonderful, wouldn't it, to say, for instance, to have some videos of students that would actually deliver their SO, or a student that would be willing to kind of have an audio file there ready for. I'm sure that's maybe something that perhaps people
We
are
could take
thinking
into
about in the
consideration and
future.
think, yeah.
Because on paper, fantastic, but that's kind of assuming that the assessors are as highly skilled as a moderator would be, if you understand what I mean there.
Yes.
For someone, say, like Laura's expertise, it's quite difficult if it doesn't seem quite real. But it's a really good starting point. But I would advise, as I say, doing some mock ones with your colleagues if possible, and having that network, even if it's just via email, to kind of say, what did you think about this? My student did this, is really helpful too.
Brilliant. Thank you. Well, thank you so much for your time, Marie. Laura, I know how busy you are at the moment. We're recording this in March, so I know the window is live now. So thank you both for your time and input. I'm gonna let Gemma end today's chat.
Yeah, so thank you both massively for coming today. You must be incredibly busy. I think it's been wonderful. There'll be some really key takeaways for other providers who can watch this, get some reassurance and support around those structured observations. We can't thank you enough. We hope to see you at things again in the future. And thanks everyone for joining us and for everyone else who's watching. Thank you. So we're moving on slightly from the video. We hope you found it really informative and useful. Just as a bit of an extension to that, our chief examiner had a few sort of extra bits that she'd like to add. So we thought we'd share those with you as well, if that's all right. So in terms of the observations being sort of 30 minutes observation and 30 minutes discussion, what she said is that as long as they're completed within an hour, there's not really any guidance stipulating how that split occurs. So it could be that you have 20 minutes for one and 40 minutes for the other. It's how that works for your students. She's also said that in terms of all assessors being seen moderation, while it might not be suggested that that has to happen, we really would say that's best practice to make sure that everybody gets seen and everybody knows what they're doing. Would you agree with that, Janet?
I absolutely would. Yeah, I think prepare for all assessors to be seen during moderation, because that's what we would see as best practice. So, but your moderator will guide you through any sort of processes with that in mind. I would
Lovely.
absolutely agree, Gemma.
Thanks, Janet. She's also shared that marks are shared with the student after all 3 observations is a recommendation. So the guidance says that providers must inform students of their marks prior to submitting these to NCFE to allow students the opportunity to request a review of provider marking.
Okay, so what kind of questions have we got that have come in during the video?
Okay, so I've been monitoring the chat and there's just a couple of questions, really, lots of discussion points. So thank you for that. One of the questions, or one of the conversations, was around the standardization pack and when would that be available. So that standardization pack that the moderators have put together will be made available to providers via that portal in year 2. And that's why it's important leading up to that stage that your students' confirmations have been registered for their occupational specialism of choice. So remember that that has to happen first. And the other question was really more of, it was a question to each other, so a really lovely networking question, and it's nice to see the chat. But for the sake of the those individuals that are going to be listening to this as a pre-recorded webinar, let me just share the essence of the conversation, which was around how are providers preparing for those structured observations. And we've got suggestions in the chat by other providers that are saying they do mocks, so they will prepare students for the experience and try to make it feel as real an experience as possible, so that those students are really preparing in the best way that they can. And one of the most important things that's cropped up in the chat is that it's really important to make sure that you're working closely with your setting so that they know that this is not like those observations that are going on all the time, like the early years educator assignment 2 part 1. But this is a sort of one chance we've got to try and create the best possible opportunity for our students in each of these 3 structured observations. So that relationship and informing your provider, the provider informing the setting, whether that's an early years setting or a school environment, is really important. And there's been lots of chat around that. And those are the questions so far. Thanks, Helen.
Thank you. So just anybody who's still here, please continue to put any questions that you have in the chat. And like it says on the screen, if we can't answer them, we'll take them away to a colleague who can. Okay, I'm going to hand back to Gemma for this next bit.
Yes, so obviously you've attended today and it's great to have you all here, and thanks for networking together and all the conversation in the chat. we'd like to invite you to our next network meeting as well. So we've got another one on the 24th of June at 3:30 till 4:30, and this is the top tips for year 2 network meeting. So it will be brilliant for anybody who's about to embark on year 2 delivery and wants to get a bit of support and a bit more sort of in-depth knowledge about how to prepare for all of those OS assignments. Another top tip that's just popped into the chat actually is if you're looking at getting those structured observations booked, get in there quickly and try and timetable those in as early as you can so that you can get the times, the dates and everything that you'd like with the students that you'd like to be observed, because you will find out as you speak with your moderator, but you will get the option to choose which students you'd like to be observed. So if you can get in quick and get that planned once you've registered for your second year, that would be great. But we'd love to see you at the new events going forward.
Lovely, thanks, Gemma. Okay, so we've reached the end of the session, and for those watching the recording, the end of the recording. If you have any questions, there's the provider development email address, and that's the link that you could use to get to those events that Gemma was just talking about, the next network meeting, for example. Janet, have you any closing comments that you'd like to make before we say bye?
Only to say that get used to, be familiar with what's being expected within those structured observations, and just do what you always do. You're doing the importance, I suppose, here is on the planning. So making sure that the students have got really good plans in terms of what they are intended to meet for that criteria. They're talking to their placements, and that they feel confident and ready. So otherwise, what you do as an assessor, just like you always do.
Lovely, thank you.
me.
And I'll say farewell now, and I'll let Gemma finish us off for today.
Well, thank you, Janet. Thank you, Helen, and thank you everyone that's joined us today. And if you're watching us on a recording, thank you for accessing that, and we hope you found it really useful. We hope to see you at the next event. Please do visit the events page, like Helen said, and register for some of the great events we've got coming up in the coming months. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.